Hey everyone, it's your friend Joseph Craven here for another episode of The Numbers Game. This is week 11, leading into week 12. Sorry, I got that confused. This is week 11 Numbers Game. This is the episode where we recap all of the scores, the statistics, just go over the numbers, none of the opinions as far as what happened in the SEC in the past week. At least for college football. We will probably start trying to do some different things about college basketball now that has started, now that is underway. But as for now, this episode's still focusing on, of course, the football numbers game in Week 11 of the SEC. The scores are as such: a quick rundown. Florida able to defeat South Carolina 35-31, a massive comeback effort from the Gators there, / massive collapse effort from the Gamecocks there. Missouri defeats Vanderbilt 33-28. Texas A&M 38 over Ole Miss with 24. That is those three games, very, very interesting games to watch. As far as games that weren't interesting to watch, Alabama 24, Mississippi State 0. Tennessee 24, Kentucky 7, Georgia 27, Auburn 10, and LSU 24, Arkansas 17. I just want to point out that actually LSU defeating Arkansas, that is the only away victory in the conference. I did not realize that until right now, but every single victory on this past weekend, aside from LSU over Arkansas, was actually at home. So I don't know if that's notable or not, but it's a statistic, so we're going to mention it in this here episode. All right, let's look at the statistical leaders on the different teams and all of these different matchups. We'll run it down in the order of what I just listed out here. As noted, of course, Florida able to pull off a comeback over South Carolina. That game, South Carolina jumped out 14-0 in the first quarter. The Gators able to equalize from 14 down in the second before South Carolina got one more touchdown before halftime. It was 21-14. Second half opened up with a Parker White 34-yard field goal for the Gamecocks to make it 24-14. They then had a touchdown in the third to go up 31-14. From then on out, though, it was all Gators. One 18-yard pass from Franks to Kadarius Toney. I don't know if it's kind of like a shovel pass, it looked like. So, but anyway, Toney, big playmaker. We'll mention him a little bit more in a second here. And then after that, a LaMichael Pirine 23-yard run and a Felipe Franks 1-yard run with 4 minutes to go to get the go-ahead touchdown. 35-31 was that final score line. Jake Bentley for South Carolina went 18 of 28 for 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Oddly enough, there were a couple of unfamiliar names at the top of the rushing list. A.J. Turner, a junior for the Gamecocks, 12 carries for 81 yards. And Mon Denson, another junior running back, with 14 carries for 49 yards. However, it was Jake Bentley who had 1 rushing touchdown and their lead running back, Rico Dowdle, who had the other touchdown on the ground. Through the air, Deebo Samuel showed why he was one of the top playmaking wide receivers in the conference coming into the season after he was able to secure 4 catches for 120 yards. Along with that, you had wide receiver Brian Edwards, who had the big-time catch against Ole Miss a week previous. Only 3 catches for 34 yards this week, a little bit quieter, of course. Shee Smith, 2 catches for 24 yards. It was Kyle Markway, the tight end, who had 1 19-yard touchdown reception, and it was the other tight end, Jacob August, who had the other touchdown through the air. 2 catches for 14 yards, and, of course, that 1 score. On the other side, the winning side of things, quarterback Felipe Franks, 15 completions on 21 attempts for 161 yards, 1 touchdown, and, of course, 2 shushes to the crowd. Jordan Scarlett on the ground led the way, 18 carries for 159 yards. It's only a miracle that he did not end up with a touchdown as well. 2 of those went to LaMichael Pirine, 16 carries for 107 yards and 2 scores. Kadarius Toney had 4 carries for 51 yards, a very, very nice 12.8 yard per carry average for Toney. Felipe Franks added 2 scores on the ground as well. Let's look over those rushing averages, though. Jordan Scarlett averaged 8.5 yards per carry. LaMichael Pirine, 6.7 yards per carry. And Kadarius Toney, 12.8 yards per carry. When the Gators realized what runs were working against the Gamecocks, my goodness, they turned it on. Through the air, spread out pretty evenly, but not necessarily anything that was outstanding. Wide receiver Josh Hammond led the way with 5 catches for 35 yards. However, it was Kadarius Toney on his 2 catches that was the most impressive, 33 yards on 2 catches, 1 touchdown. Trevon Grimes also had 2 catches for 24 yards. Behind them, though, Tyree Cleveland, 1 19-yard catch. Tight end Seontae Lewis had 1 14-yard catch, and wide receiver Van Jefferson 1 14-yard catch as well. Missouri able to take a victory away from Vanderbilt. 33-28 was that final score. That game, another one that the Commodores jumped out early over the Missouri Tigers. They scored very early on a Keyshawn Vaughn 65-yard touchdown run to go up 7-0. It was 14-7 at the end of the first quarter, and then it was mostly Commodores in the second quarter. Tucker McCann from Missouri able to get 2 field goals, but 1 more touchdown added for the Commodores. 21-13 was the score at halftime. After that, Demaria Crockett had an 11-yard pass to bring it to 21-19, a failed 2-point conversion to tie the game there. Vanderbilt was able to score again to bring it up to 28-19. However, the Missouri Tigers scored with 4 minutes, 39 seconds to go off of a Drew Lock 20-yard pass to Daniel Parker to make it 28-26. And then in the fourth quarter, Drew Lock got a score on the ground to lead the Tigers to that 33-28 victory. For the Commodores, Kyle Shermer went 24 of 35, 249 yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air. Very impressive performance from the Vanderbilt signal caller. On the ground, though, it was Keyshawn Vaughn. Lipscomb's the next player listed here. Keyshawn Vaughn, who had a stupid 182 yards and 1 touchdown on only 15 carries. My goodness, 12.1 yards per carry. Of course, 65 of those came off of that 1 big touchdown run to start the game off. However, that's still 14 carries for over 100 yards. Very nice numbers there. Wide receiver Khalija Lipscomb had 2 carries for 15 yards. They also had 1 other wide receiver who carried the ball 1 time. That was Donovan Tennyson. He had 1 13-yard rush. Behind that, though, it was Kyrie Blasingame, their other running back, who had 6 carries for only 6 yards. So not a whole lot on the ground behind Keyshawn Vaughn, but when you got 1 running back who has 182 yards, you don't need much else. Khalija Lipscomb led the way through the air, 8 receptions, 99 yards, 1 touchdown. Jared Pinkney, their star tight end, 5 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown as well. Behind them, you had wide receiver Chris Pierce that added 3 catches for 27 yards. And Vaughn had 2 receptions, 1 touchdown through the air, 14 yards. Heck of a performance out of Keyshawn Vaughn. Drew Lock on the other side, 22 of 33 for 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions on the day as well. Demaria Crockett and Larry Roundtree III carried the Tigers on the ground. Crockett had 122 yards and a touchdown on 22 rushing attempts. Roundtree 92 yards on 21 rushing attempts. Wow. We're looking at Vanderbilt over here with 1 running back that has 15. Missouri had 2 running backs that had over 20 carries on the day. That's really impressive. Drew Lock, as noted, had 1 rushing touchdown as well. Through the air for the Missouri Tigers, very interesting that they had a couple of players that really stood out for yardage, but did not have touchdowns through all of that. Dominique Jacinto, a freshman wide receiver, led the way with 81 yards on 4 receptions, 20 yards per catch. Along with that, Jonathan Johnson, And junior wide receiver had 70 yards on 6 catches. But as noted, neither of them knotted any touchdowns. Tight end Daniel Parker had one of the touchdowns through the air. He also had 3 catches total for 42 yards. Emmanuel Hall, their leading wide receiver for much of the season, had 3 catches for only 22 yards. And Demaria Crockett, their running back, added 2 catches, 15 yards, but one of those was for a touchdown through the air as well. This was a battle between two of the most impressive quarterbacks as far as talent goes, between Kyle Shermer and Drew Lock, in the conference. However, it was the running backs that really stole the show. Very, very interesting game there between Vanderbilt and Missouri. Also, the only 2 teams in the conference that wear black and gold. So, what do you know? What a weird game. What a weird thing for me to have just pointed out as well. I'm sorry for being such an awkward human being. Texas A&M held off Ole Miss 38-24 in another wild, high-scoring, back-and-forth affair. This game was tied most of the time. A&M able to open up the scoring as the first quarter was drawing to a close. 1-yard Kellen Mond run with 1:49 left in the first to go up 7-0. However, it did not take long. Very, very soon into the second quarter. In fact, only 9 seconds into the second quarter, Ole Miss was able to even the score. They took a lead a little bit later on, 14-7. However, A&M able to drive down late in the quarter to tie it up right before halftime, 14-14 at the break. Zedrick Woods for Ole Miss was able to get a very, very impressive fumble return. Kellen Mond drops the ball towards the goal line. Zedrick Woods picks it up, returns it 96 yards to put Ole Miss up 21-14. That would be just about it for the Rebels, however. Later in the game, A&M drives down, has a nice little fade route pass to Courtney Davis, ties it up at 21 again. The fourth quarter, things get even crazier. A&M held to a field goal early in the fourth, but they do go up 24-21. Ole Miss tries to make a push. However, it's A&M that gets the next score. Another pass to Courtney Davis. It's now 31-21. Ole Miss gets the ball back later in the game. With under 2 minutes to go, they're held to a field goal. It's 31-24 while trying to get the ball back, while trying to stop A&M as best they can. However, Travion Williams breaks a 46-yard run for a touchdown to seal the game. That literally happened about 11 seconds after the Ole Miss field goal. So 38-24 was the final score there. Let's look at the statistics for these 2 teams, starting with the Ole Miss Rebels. Jordan Ta'amu continues his incredible statistical season. 22 of 35 passing for 373 yards and 1 touchdown through the air. No turnovers there. It was Isaiah Woolard, the freshman running back, that led the way on the ground, 16 carries for 64 yards. One of the SEC's top running backs, Scotty Phillips, did not see much time as he was shaken up in the game. He only had 3 carries for 4 yards. Jordan Ta'amu had the lone rushing touchdown for the Ole Miss Rebels on the day. Through the air, A.J. Brown, no big surprises here. 6 catches for 127 yards. DeMarcus Lodge, 6 catches for 122 yards and 1 touchdown. Tight end Octavius Cooley added 3 catches for 66 yards. And then their rising offensive star as far as wide receivers go, the freshman Elijah Moore added 5 catches for 40 yards. Woolard out the backfield had 1 10-yard reception as well. And we also saw 1 reception go towards Eric Sweeney, a junior running back who had had a lot of injuries over his career. He actually saw some playing time. He had 1 2-yard carry, 1 8-yard reception on the day. Kellen Mond for the Aggies went 19 of 28 for 236 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception and, of course, that 1 fumble on the day. So kind of the season that Kellen Mond has had, a lot of really good numbers and then a handful of really bad ones. Turnovers especially plagued Mond so far on the year. But he was able to win the game for the Aggies, so they're not going to complain too much about that. The overall star of all of this entire game ends up being Travion Williams. He had a silly 31 carries for 228 yards and a touchdown. That 46-yard run at the end is what helps his average out because he had been carrying the ball constantly. 31 carries, my goodness. But 228 yards and a touchdown. Of course, that touchdown sealed the game for the Aggies for sure. Behind him, though, we did see some action out of Jashawn Corbin, a freshman running back for the Aggies. 6 carries for 28 yards. Kellen Mond added 1 rushing touchdown as well. Through the air, their stud tight end, Jay Sternberger, 4 catches for 76 yards. Hey, can we take a moment to acknowledge just how impressive the tight ends in the SEC have been this year? I mean, between you got Jared Pinkney, you got Jay Sternberger, you got Agawig Boonham out of Missouri. I mean, there's some stud receiving tight ends here. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see some of these dudes, killing it on Sundays pretty soon here, just based off of the way this season has gone. Anyway, also through the air, we had Jamon Osborne, who I don't really know if he's done a whole lot for the Aggies so far on the year. I'm looking, his year-to-date totals, only 20 receptions for 287 yards, so that's not terrible, but not a name that we've seen a whole lot up here at the top of the list for the Aggies. He did have 5 catches for 66 yards. Along with that, Cameron Buckley, another wide receiver who we have seen quite a bit this year, 4 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown. But it was Courtney Davis, 3 catches, 25 yards, but 2 of those were for touchdowns, so he made his targets count for sure for Texas A&M in this particular game. Alabama defeated Mississippi State 24-0. However, if you watched the game, you notice it was not nearly as bad an outing as it seemed. It was a little bit closer game, especially off of the Mississippi State defense, who proved themselves to be maybe the most talented defense in the country. Offense was hard to come by, though, for the Bulldogs. Let's look at their numbers. Nick Fitzgerald went 11 of 20 for 125 yards through the air, no touchdowns, no turnovers. Running back Kylan Hill carried the ball 7 times for 47 yards, a 6.7-yard average. He continues to have a very nice average this season. Kind of makes you wonder, if you pay attention to the Bulldogs, why in the world he doesn't get the ball handed to him more often. But I guess that's just the offensive scheme. I don't know. Aries Williams, the senior running back, 7 carries for 28 yards. Nick Fitzgerald was credited with negative 23 rushing yards, which brings their rushing team totals down, of course, because of those sacks that happened. And that's important to note because the running backs did well. However, there were sacks that brought it down. And I'll mention why I mentioned that later on, because it plays into some player of the week statistics. Dedrick Thomas for the Bulldogs had 2 catches for 25 yards. Aries Williams, 1 catch, 23 yards. Osiris Mitchell, 2 catches for 17 yards. Jeremy Johnson, not Jeremy Johnson. My goodness. Justin Johnson, the tight end for the Bulldogs, 2 catches for 14 yards. Farad Green, another tight end, 1 catch for 12 yards. Stephen Guidry, 1 12-yard catch as well. And as noted, Kylan Hill had 1 reception that would have been for a touchdown. However, that was called back off of a strange block in the back call. For the Crimson Tide, quarterback Tua Tagovailoa went 14 of 21 for 164 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Looked fairly mortal in this game against a very good defense, but he still did a good job regardless. Did not play too much because they were worried that he had aggravated his knee injury again, so they put in their current second-string quarterback, Mac Jones, who went 3 of 6 for negative 1 yards. At that point in time, they were just running the ball as much as possible. Crimson Tide decided to rely on their running back Josh Jacobs in this particular game, running him 20 times for 97 yards and 1 touchdown. Damian Harris did have 14 rushing attempts for 53 yards and a touchdown. And Najee Harris added only 3 carries for 16 yards on the day. Tua Tagovailoa netted negative yardage as he actually got sacked a couple of times, which is shocking for the Crimson Tide so far this season. Might be the only time we don't see one of their offensive linemen listed as offensive lineman of the week. Irv Smith Jr., their tight end, had 5 catches for 70 yards. Jerry Jeudy, their star wide receiver, 6 catches, but only 45 yards, which is good for anyone, but a slow day for him. The numbers he's been putting up so far on this season, a heck of a year for Jeudy. Jalen Waddle added 3 catches for 26 yards. And it was running back Josh Jacobs that took a little wheel route into the end zone, the one receiving touchdown on the day for the Crimson Tide. As noted, though, we'll get to some of the defensive statistics, individual statistics later on, but the Mississippi State defense was the toughest defense that Alabama had seen so far this year, and it did limit them to a lot of numbers lower than normal for what their silly good offense has put together so far in the year. But if you want to hear more about the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Mississippi State defense, why don't you listen to our full-length episode we put out? There's a lot of opinions there. There's a whole lot of crazy conspiracy theories as well. There's a quick plug for the other stuff that we do on ROTC. Unranked Tennessee handles number 11 Kentucky. This is Kentucky's second half of the season collapse, in full effect. It seems like 24-7 was the score of that game. It was 24-0 until the last 2 minutes of the game when Kentucky finally put something up on the board. Tennessee was just able to get it done. I'm sorry, the last 2 minutes of the third quarter, nothing happened in the fourth. But Tennessee got a field goal in the first, got two touchdowns in the second to go up 17-0 at half. In the third quarter, they had one more touchdown to go up 24-0. Kentucky able to get that one score late in the third, but that is about it. Let's look at the Wildcat statistics. Terry Wilson, their quarterback, went 21 of 34 for 172 yards, one touchdown, one interception. They've been throwing the ball quite a bit with Wilson the last few weeks. I guess that's just what happens when they finally play from behind. Gunnar Hoke also saw some action, went 2 of 4 for 13 yards, but also threw a pick, so yikes. Benny Snell Jr. had 20 carries for 81 yards, well below his average in rushing attempts and yardage so far on the season. A better performance than we have seen, but he's held under 100 yards once again. A couple of other Wildcats saw a couple of carries, but none of them really noteworthy. Asim Rose, 2 carries for 9 yards. Lynn Bowden Jr., wide receiver, 2 carries for 1 yard. Terry Wilson was netted -6 yardage. Yardage on the day? My goodness, I'm falling apart. Lynn Bowden Jr. led the way through the air with 6 receptions and 57 yards. However, it was their tight end, another tight end that sees a lot of goal line action, C.J. Conrad, 2 catches for 39 yards, 1 touchdown. That touchdown came from 19 yards out. So a decent chunk yardage receptions out of C.J. Conrad. Behind them, though, there were a couple of wide receivers that had multiple catches. Taven Richardson, 4 catches for 37 yards. Benny Snell out the backfield, 6 catches for 25 yards. And then the final wide receiver for the Wildcats to net anything was David Bouvier with 3 catches, 19 yards. On the other side of things, it was Jarrett Guarantano, who went 12 of 20 for 197 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air, no turnovers there. Tim Chandler, the running back for the, Ty Chandler, the running back for the Volunteers, carried the ball 16 times for 89 yards. Tim Jordan, there we go, their other running back, 15 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. So nice little spread out the carries there, 16 and 15. However, there was the biggest run on the day was a wide receiver carry. Jordan Murphy, speedy wide receiver, took 1 carry for 59 yards. However, it did not score. So it doesn't count for anything, I say. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, y'all. Through the air, making the most of their targets was the wide receiving core here. Marquez Callaway, only 2 catches, but for 56 yards, one of them being a touchdown. That touchdown was from 39 yards out. Tim Jordan, the running back, had 2 catches as well. He took that for 41 yards. Jordan Murphy, another wide receiver for the Volunteers, 1 catch for 38 yards. Josh Palmer, wide receiver, 1 catch for 25 yards. Dominique Wood Anderson, their tight end, had 4 catches. That was for 18 yards, but one of those was for a touchdown. And Juwan Jennings had 1 11-yard catch. So a lot of those plays for the Volunteers being downfield passes as they really tried to pick apart a very tough Kentucky defense. Kentucky defense, of course, if they cannot hold the other team and if the offense can't pound the ball down to the red zone, then they're playing from behind is just not really their strength. Another thing that happened here, let's see, is Georgia 27, Auburn 10, in a game that was dominated mostly by Georgia, especially in the second quarter. Auburn actually had the lead at the end of the first. It was 7-3 after Jatarvis Whitlow actually threw a little trick pass play that went in for a touchdown. But after that, after holding Georgia to just some field goals, In fact, adding a field goal themselves. With 2:47 to go in the first half, Georgia scored their first touchdown to go up 13-10. They scored a second one before the half ended, 20-10 at halftime. After that, scoreless in the third quarter. The fourth quarter rolls around. It's 27-10 after a DeAndre Swift 77-yard touchdown run to really super seal the game there. But a very interesting game, but one that Georgia seemed to control for the majority, at least the end of the second quarter and the second half in particular. For the Auburn Tigers, Jarrett Stidham went 24 of 36 for 163 yards, no touchdowns or interceptions of note. Jatarvis Whitlow, of course, completed his lone pass. It happened to be a 9-yard touchdown, so great passer rating for Jatarvis Whitlow, the running back. He did not have a great day on the ground, though. Sean Shivers led the way on the ground with 4 carries for 43 yards. Jarrett Stidham actually had 36 yards rushing on 6 carries. Whitlow, 9 rushing attempts, but only 26 yards on the day. Through the air, the Auburn Tigers were led by Ryan Davis, their wide receiver, who had 13 receptions for 72 yards. 13 receptions. Wow. Seth Williams, another wide receiver, one of their younger wide receivers, I believe, a freshman. He had 3 catches for 38 yards. Speedy freshman Anthony Schwartz, 2 catches for 27. And a running back, Malik Miller, had 2 catches as well for 13 yards. The lone touchdown on the day for the Auburn Tigers, of course, on that trick play there, that catch was made by tight end John Schinker. It was his lone catch on the day for 9 yards and a touchdown. I apologize for trying to pronounce his name. Jake Fromm for the Georgia went 13 of 20 for 193 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. We saw their freshman Justin Fields. He completed both of his passing attempts for 20 yards. Rodrigo Blankenship actually had 1 passing attempt, but it was incomplete. DeAndre Swift on the ground, 17 carries, 186 yards, and a touchdown. That touchdown, of course, was for 77 yards. So even before then, he had 16 carries for over 100 yards. Not too bad. Elijah Holyfield, 15 carries, 93 yards. The Georgia Bulldogs able to run the ball quite well. Brian Harrion, their third running back, actually carried the ball 5 times for 37 yards as well. Through the air, they were led by Terry Godwin. Wide receiver had 3 catches for 84 yards, 1 touchdown. Swift added 4 catches out of the backfield for 43 yards. 2 receptions went to Mecole Hardman, 39 yards there. Riley Ridley added 1 19-yard reception. And the other passing touchdown went to wide receiver Tyler Simmons. He had 2 catches for 15 yards on the day. The final game to discuss here was LSU going on the road and defeating Arkansas 24-17. LSU was up for this entire game. It was 24-3 going into the fourth quarter. Just about 3 minutes into the fourth quarter, Arkansas gets a touchdown, a 11-yard touchdown pass from Ty Storey to their tight end Cheyenne O'Grady, 24-10 there. Later in the game, Cheyenne O'Grady, Ty Storey connect once again 32 yards out to make it 24-17. However, that was about 5.5 minutes to go. However, after that, unable to get any more points for the Razorbacks. Their statistics on the day, Ty Storey went 19 of 38 for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Cole Kelly attempted 1 pass. It was incomplete. Rakeem the Dream Boyd had 10 carries for only 30 yards. The Tigers really locking down the Razorbacks' rushing offense. Cheyenne O'Grady, their tight end, 6 catches for 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was their main go-to weapon there. They had a couple other players that had a few receptions as well. Jared Cornelius, 2 catches for 46 yards. LaMichael Petway, 2 catches, 33 yards. Grayson Gunter, another tight end of theirs, had 1 23-yard reception, and that is about it as of note for the Razorbacks. The LSU Tigers on the other side of things, Joe Burrow, their quarterback, went 15 of 21, 195 yards, 1 touchdown. Nick Brossette carried the ball 23 times for 90 yards, 1 touchdown, a 3.9-yard average. Clyde Edwards-Helaire added 17 carries for 56 yards, 1 touchdown, 3.3-yard average as well. The Tigers not really running the ball well whatsoever. Offense kind of just hard to come by for both teams, it looks like here. LSU was led through the air by Justin Jefferson. He had 6 catches for 117 yards and a touchdown. Been their go-to target through the air on the season, and nothing different here. D. Anderson added 126-yard reception. Along with that, Derek Dillon, 2 catches for 25 yards, and 2 catches as well for Jamar Chase, 19 yards. That is about it for them. And that's about it for the statistics and individual matchups. Unchanged at the top of both the AP and the coaches' polls. Alabama still there. Georgia still at number 5 in both polls. LSU has moved to number 10 in both polls. They were at number 9 last week in the AP. They've dropped, but they've held the same in the coaches' poll. Florida moves up several spots. They move up 4 spots, number 15 in the AP, up 5 spots, number 16 in the coaches' poll. Kentucky drops 8 spots in the AP. They're down to number 20. They've dropped to number 21 in the coaches. That's down 9 spots. And Mississippi State down 7 spots to number 25 in the AP poll, down 8 spots to the 23 in the coaches' poll, but still hanging on. One of the few 4 lost teams to be ranked in either poll. Along with that, Texas A&M received 16 AP votes. Auburn received 3. On the other side, in the coaches' poll, Texas A&M received 29 top 25 votes. Auburn, 19. And Tennessee actually received 1 coaches' poll vote. The SEC Players of the Week. Offensive Players of the Week were 2 running backs, DeAndre Swift of Georgia and Travion Williams of Texas A&M. Swift, of course, went for 186 yards and that 1 touchdown. He also had a team-high 4 catches for 43 yards. Georgia piled up 516 total yards. No team has piled up that many yards on Auburn since Oklahoma did in the 2016 Sugar Bowl. So that was only 2 seasons ago. But still, DeAndre Swift is the first Georgia player to have 2 runs of 75 yards or longer since Herschel Walker did it in 1980. So good for you, DeAndre Swift. Having a heck of a season. Travion Williams for A&M had 31 rushes. Wow. For 228 yards, that's a 7.4 yard average. It's his 4th 200-yard game of his career. All right? 4th. He is a junior, which means unless he decides to try to cash in on all that right now, which he might, we could see him add another few next season as well. It's a really impressive career that he has had. He has tied all-time Aggie leading rusher Darren Lewis, who had 4 200-yard rushing games. In the SEC in the past 15 years, Leonard Fournette of LSU had 5 200-yard games, and Derrick Henry of Alabama had 4 200-yard games. So in the past 15 years, only 2 other players have done what Travion Williams has done in his career so far. And Leonard Fournette and Derrick Henry, not bad names to be associated with. Darren Lewis of A&M, back from 80, he played in 87 to 1990. He had 2 200-yard rushing games in a single season. He's the only other Aggie to have ever done what Travion Williams has done. Williams has 1,159 rushing yards, 8th best in Aggie history. That's just on this year. And 3,014 career rushing yards, tied for 5th all-time in Texas A&M history. On defense, the defensive player of the week this week was Darrell Taylor, linebacker of Tennessee. 4 sacks, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, and 7 tackles to lead Tennessee to that upset over Kentucky. His 4 sacks, which is silly, it's tied for the most by any player in all of FBS this season. He's only the 3rd volunteer ever to have 4 sacks in 1 game. Not only that, it's his 2nd 3-sack-plus game of the season. So when he decides to sack the quarterback, he does it in bunches. Kind of makes you wonder why he doesn't do it in more games. Special teams player of the week is Braden Mann, the punter and kickoff specialist for Texas A&M. No surprise there. He punted 4 times with an average of 47.8 yards and a longest of 63 yards. 2 of those punts were killed within the 20-yard line. No touchbacks on any of his punts. That 63-yard punt was his 13th punt of 60 yards or longer this season, which ties the NCAA record for 60-yard-plus punts. That record was set in 2005. Of his 7 kickoffs, only 1 was returned, and it was only returned for 12 yards. Freshman of the week was Daniel Parker, the tight end of Missouri. He caught 3 passes for 42 yards and 1 touchdown, which is all very good numbers, of course. But what's notable about all this is that 2 weeks before the season, he was training to be a defensive end for the Tigers. And I think because of that, he seems to have really brought in much more of a blocking tight end focus than what their other tight ends bring. In fact, he actually sealed the edge for that 3-yard run that Drew Lock had that gave Missouri the lead and eventually won the game for them. So he was the key blocker there. So really impressive performance out of Daniel Parker, both blocking and receiving to lead the way for Missouri to win that game. Offensive lineman of the week was Martez Ivy of Florida. He was part of an offensive unit that allowed the Gators to produce 367 yards of rushing offense on 62 carries, averaging 5.9 yards per rush. Wow, what a rushing performance for Florida. That was its 6th game of 200-plus rushing yards this season. It's tied for the record for most in a season since 2009, the second time since the start of the 2015 season. They also had 4-plus rushing touchdowns. This was their highest team rushing yardage total since 2004. On the season, 2004 season, they had 2,031 yards. So good for Florida there. Defensive lineman of the week, because you have to have an Alabama player mentioned, was Quinnen Williams, the defensive lineman of Alabama. He had 6 total tackles. 4 of those were solo stops, 2 tackles for a loss, 1 sack for a loss of 5 yards. Mississippi State, their opponent, had only 44 team rushing yards. That's why I mentioned Fitzgerald's sacks were really what brought that total down. Alabama has surrendered just 157 yards on the ground in the last 4 games. So an impressive performance from Williams, but an impressive performance across the entire defensive line for Alabama. You just legally cannot have a week go by where you don't have an Alabama player mentioned in the players of the week. So there you go. All right, the statistical leaders, we'll speed through these real quick because not much has changed, but Jordan Ta'amu still the leading passer, 3,374 yards. Drew Lock of Missouri, second place, 2,647. Third place, Tua Tagovailoa, 2,525 yards. Kellen Mond of A&M in fourth place, 2,488. And Kyle Shermer of Vanderbilt, fifth place, 2,286 yards. Tua Tagovailoa still leads the conference in passing touchdowns with 28. Drew Lock's behind him with 21. Jake Fromm in third place with 19. Kyle Shermer, Felipe Franks, Jordan Ta'amu all tied in fourth place with 17 passing touchdowns so far on the year. In rushing yardage, Travion Williams with his 200-plus yard performance is in first place with 1,159 rushing yards. Benny Snell in second place with 1,114. Scotty Phillips of Ole Miss drops to third place with 927. Actually, I think he was already in third place, but he's still under 1,000 yards after sitting out most of that game due to injury. Keyshawn Vaughn of Vanderbilt is in fourth place, 849 yards after a very good performance. And Nick Fitzgerald of Mississippi State still hanging on to that fifth place spot, 816 rushing yards. DeAndre Swift closing in on him, though, with 808 yards to be in sixth place as the only other player that has 800 rushing yards so far in the SEC. Scotty Phillips still has the most touchdowns, rushing touchdowns in the conference with 12. Nick Brossette of LSU and Travion Williams of A&M are tied with 11. Benny Snell is behind them with 10. And then there's a 4-way tie with 9 rushing touchdowns between Keyshawn Vaughn of Vanderbilt, Nick Fitzgerald of Mississippi State, Joshua Jacobs of Alabama, and Larry Roundtree III of Missouri. As far as receiving yardage goes, A.J. Brown is in the top spot with 1,047 receiving yards. Jerry Jeudy of Alabama, 925. Khalija Lipscomb of Vanderbilt is in third place with 731. DeMarcus Lodge of Ole Miss with 706. Justin Jefferson of LSU jumps up in there with 669 yards to be the top 5 in the conference in receiving yards. Jeudy of Alabama still leads the conference with 10 touchdown receptions. Henry Ruggs of Alabama in second place with 8. Khalija Lipscomb of Vanderbilt in third place with 7. And a giant tie behind them with 6 touchdowns goes to Jay Sternberger of A&M, Irv Smith Jr. of Alabama, Jared Pinkney of Vanderbilt, C.J. O'Grady of Arkansas, Brian Edwards of South Carolina, and Albert Ogwugbunam of Missouri. Do want to point out that out of all of that, those players that have 6 touchdowns here, almost all of them are tight ends. So you talk about the tight end position in the SEC right now. It is a scoring position. I mean, Sternberger, Irv Smith Jr., Jared Pinkney, C.J. O'Grady, and Albert Ogwugbunam, all tight ends, all have 6 touchdowns to be in the top 5 statistically for the conference. That's impressive. It's impressive tight ends that we have in the conference right now. All right, looking at the leaders in total tackles, that's Dejon Harris of Arkansas with 105 total tackles on the season. Jordan Griffin of Vanderbilt in second place, 98. Number 3 is Mohamed Sanogo of Ole Miss, 92 tackles. Fourth place is Deshaun Davis of Auburn with 91. And in fifth place is Devin White of Louisiana State University with 89 total tackles. Josh Allen of Kentucky is in the top spot now in terms of sacks with 11. Montez Sweat of Mississippi State has 10. He's in second place. Isaiah Buggs of Alabama also with 10, but he's marked as in third place, which means he probably actually has 9.5 sacks, but they listed as 10 in this list that I'm basing this on right now. Ja'Kai Polite of Florida with 8, and then a big tie with 7 sacks goes to Armon Watts of Arkansas, Christian Miller of Alabama, Nick Coe of Auburn, and Darrell Taylor of Tennessee, who of course got... So literally all of his sacks this season have been in 2 games. He got a 3-sack game and then a 4-sack game. That's really impressive right there. Anyway, Grant Delpete of Louisiana State still has 5 interceptions to lead the way. There's a huge tie with 3. I don't think much of this has changed since last week. Jojuan Williams of Vanderbilt, John Battle of LSU, Darius West of Kentucky, Rashad Fenton of South Carolina, Ryan Pulley of Arkansas, Savion Smith of Alabama, and Bryce Thompson of Tennessee all have 3 interceptions apiece. There's a big tie amongst the different cornerbacks in terms of who has defended the most passes. I'm going to give you everyone that has defended 7, 8, or 9. DeAndre Baker, Christian Fulton of Louisiana State, DeAndre Baker of Georgia, Christian Fulton of Louisiana State, Christian Holmes of Missouri all have 9 pass defenses to their credit. DeMarcus Acey of Missouri, Andres Williams of Louisiana State, Noah Igbenogene of Auburn, Cameron Dantzler of Mississippi State, and J.C. Horn of South Carolina all have 8 passes defended. And Javaris Davis of Auburn with 7 passes defended on the day. Hey, that's going to wrap up this episode of The Numbers Game here on Running Up the Clock. I'm your friend Joseph Craven, as always, joined by my co-host, Puppy Radar O'Reilly, who has left the room because my wife is home and she is bored with the sound of my voice and would rather hang out with someone who will pet her. I'm also bored with the sound of my voice. I'm sure you are too. I'll see you next week, Week 12 edition of The Numbers Game on Running Up the Clock.